I live in Texas, out on the northern fringes of Dallas where the suburbs collapse into open ranch land and the sunsets stretch so wide across the sky it almost hurts to look at them. For years, I dreamt about owning my own home. Not some sterile condo squeezed between parking garages, not a boxy apartment with paper-thin walls and neighbors you barely know. A real house. One with a porch, maybe a backyard, something with a story behind it. That dream finally clawed its way into reality. A few months back when I closed the deal on a battered little two-story house at the end of a dead-end street. It wasn't fancy, not by a long shot. The roof sagged a little on the south side, and the porch light hung crookedly from one loose nail, flickering when the wind caught it just right. The lawn had given up on being grass years ago, and now resembled a field of stubborn weeds and cracked dirt. But it was mine. Every splintered floorboard, every peeling shutter, every stubborn rust-stained pipe. It was mine. The place used to belong to the Bradshaw family, folks I had known from way back. Good people, salt-of-the-earth types, the kind who hosted summer barbecues and Christmas parties where everyone left with leftovers stacked high in aluminum foil. Life had not been kind to them after the 2020s. Financial ruin, medical bills, one of their sons getting tangled up with the law. They held on as long as they could before the inevitable caught up. They sold most of their belongings, kissed their memories goodbye, and headed north to Canada, chasing a fresh start like a leaf in the wind. When I heard through a mutual friend that the Bradshaw place was going on the market, I didn't hesitate. I made an offer the same day, far below market value. They accepted without blinking. Part of me felt guilty, but another part knew they were relieved it was going to someone they knew, someone who might actually care about the old place instead of bulldozing it into oblivion. Closing took less than a month. On the first bright Saturday of March, I pulled up to the house with a rented U-Haul packed to the brim. The air smelled like fresh-cut hay and gasoline. My heart pounded against my ribs as I stepped through the front door, carrying the first box into the hollow echo of my new home. Dust motes danced in the slanting sunlight that spilled through the broken blinds. Somewhere in the walls, something scurried, probably a mouse or two. I didn't care. I laughed out loud, just from the sheer giddy freedom of it all. My laughter bounced around the empty rooms like a gunshot. Home. My home. The honeymoon didn't last long. As the sun sank lower, I discovered that abandonment changes more than just the cosmetics of a place. The house had been empty for 3 years. In that time, it had become a magnet for the forgotten and the reckless. Half-finished renovations stood like monuments to good intentions, plywood stacked against the kitchen walls, wires hanging loose from the ceilings, the bathroom sink tilted at a drunken angle. The front door was a joke, a warped slab of wood, barely hanging onto rusted hinges, secured only by a flimsy padlock. No fence to keep people out, no alarm system. The old mailbox still leaned drunkenly against its post, stuffed with rotting flyers and expired coupons. I thought maybe it would be a few days before the neighborhood realized the house was no longer theirs to treat like a ghost. I was wrong. It started almost immediately. After unloading the last heavy box from the truck, sweaty and exhausted, I wandered into the garage to grab my toolbox and froze. There, sitting like a defiant exclamation point in the middle of the oil-stained floor, was a beat-up Honda motorcycle. Rust crept up its frame like ivy. No license plates, no note. Just sitting there as if it had every right to exist inside my house. For a long minute, I just stared, stunned into immobility. Who did it belong to? How long had it been there? Was it abandoned? Stolen? I circled it slowly, keeping a wide berth, like it might leap up and bite me. Eventually, common sense kicked in. It didn't matter. It didn't belong here anymore. I pushed the bike outside, muscles straining against its stubborn weight, and left it slumped over the curb with a cardboard sign taped to the handlebars that read, "Not your garage, not your storage, do not return." Wasn't naive. I knew this would ruffle feathers. People don't like it when you upset their routines, even if their routines involve trespassing on property that doesn't belong to them. So before the sun had even fully set, I called a gate company and scheduled an emergency installation. I wasn't playing around. By noon the next day, a 10-foot-tall wrought iron gate spanned the driveway, complete with a keypad entry system, and a lock sturdy enough to make Fort Knox jealous. When the workers packed up and left, I stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed, surveying my small fortress. A knot of pride tightened in my chest. It might not have been perfect yet, but it was secure. That night, I sat on the porch swing with a cold beer in hand, watching the stars prick holes in the darkening sky. Crickets sang. A warm breeze teased the hem of my jeans. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could build something real here. A future. A home. Until around 9:15 p.m. That's when the banging started, violent, furious, metal on metal clanging that echoed down the entire block. I jerked upright, heart hammering in my throat. I squinted into the dim wash of the streetlights. There, standing with legs spread and fists pounding against my brand new gate, was a man. Scrawny, wiry, wrapped in a filthy denim jacket. His hair stuck out at wild angles and his mouth worked furiously, spitting curses I couldn't quite make out from this distance. But his meaning was clear. He wasn't happy about the new rules. I stayed hidden behind the curtain, watching with grim detachment as he shouted and kicked, rattling the gate so hard it shivered on its hinges. Words floated up to me, half caught on the wind, accusations about the motorcycle, about respect, about ownership. At one point he screamed, "You think you're better than us?" over and over, until his voice cracked and broke into ugly sobs. Eventually, he stomped back to the curb, kicked the abandoned Honda into a sputtering rage, and tore off into the night like a wounded animal. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought wrong. The next morning, the world looked deceptively normal. Birds chirped from the skeletal branches of the oak trees that lined the street. A lawnmower droned lazily somewhere in the distance. The scent of bacon and coffee drifted from a neighbor's open kitchen window. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that last night had just been some isolated tantrum, the last dying gasp of a bad habit being broken. I spent the better part of the day unpacking boxes, scrubbing floors, hammering loose nails, and replacing shattered window panes. Every small act of repair felt like a statement, a declaration to the universe that I was here to stay. I wasn't, just passing through. I was planting roots. But as the sun slid lower and the long shadows crept across the cracked sidewalks, that fragile sense of peace unraveled like rotted thread. Around 6 p.m., I heard it again. The rumble of an engine, lingering too long at the curb, the squeal of tires when it finally peeled away. A few minutes later, a different car coasted past, windows tinted too dark to see through. It slowed in front of the gate, idled for a heartbeat too long, then rolled on. I tried to ignore it. Told myself it was nothing. Paranoia, moving jitters. First night nerves. But deep down, some primal instinct I couldn't name stirred and whispered, "This isn't over." That night, the real war began. It started small. A series of loud knocks at the gate, sporadic and mocking. Always just after midnight. Always spaced far enough apart to keep me hovering in that raw, sleepless edge between fury and fear. The first night, it was just knocking. The second night, they threw eggs, fat, rotten things that splattered against the iron bars and oozed down in viscous rivers. The third night, it escalated. Rocks, shattered glass. Once, what looked suspiciously like a Molotov cocktail that fizzled harmlessly against the driveway thanks to the sprinkler system I had rigged to trip after dark. I called the cops. Of course I did. They came, shining flashlights into the bushes, taking half-hearted statements, nodding along with that glazed, world-weary look of men who had seen too much and cared too little. "Teenagers," they said, "probably just bored. It'll pass once they realize you're not going anywhere." But their words tasted hollow. I could see it in their eyes. They knew. Everyone knew. This wasn't random mischief. This was personal. A punishment. A warning. On the fourth night, they sent a message. I woke around 3 a.m. to a low, crackling sound, the unmistakable hiss of burning, I bolted upright, heart hammering, lungs seizing. Through the thin gauze of my bedroom curtains, I saw a blossom of orange light blooming near the curb. I raced outside, bare feet slapping against the splintered porch boards. There, smoldering in the driveway, was a crude effigy, a scarecrow stitched together from old clothes stuffed with newspaper, crowned with a battered motorcycle helmet. Pinned to its chest was a scrap of cardboard scrawled with jagged black letters. Not your home. Terror and rage warred inside me, a twisting hurricane of emotion that left me breathless. I stomped out the burning figure with the heel of my boot, coughing against the acrid smoke, tears streaming down my face from the heat and fury. Across the street, hidden in the shadows between two dead streetlights, I thought I caught the glint of eyes watching. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I made my decision. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to cower inside my own house while a bunch of cowardly ghosts tried to drive me out. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. I hired contractors. I fortified the perimeter. Brick columns reinforced the gate. Security cameras sprouted from the eaves like mechanical gargoyles, their blinking red light sending a clear message. I see you. I wired motion sensors into the yard, installed floodlights that would snap on at the slightest provocation. I even got a dog, a massive snarling German shepherd named Rocco, whose bark alone was enough to freeze blood in the veins. I built my castle, I loaded my moat, and I waited. They didn't come for a while after that. Maybe they were regrouping. Maybe they were afraid. Maybe they were just waiting for the right moment. But I could feel it, like a storm building on the horizon, thickening the air, electrifying the sky. Every night I sat on the porch with Rocco at my feet, a shotgun resting across my lap, staring into the darkness and daring it to blink first. Every creak, every rustle, every passing car became a potential threat. I barely slept. I barely ate. I lived in a state of constant siege. One night, about a week after the effigy incident, I woke to Rocco growling low and deep in his throat, the sound vibrating against the wooden floorboards. I grabbed the shotgun and crept toward the front window, peeking through a gap in the curtains. What I saw made my stomach drop. Lined up along the sidewalk, standing shoulder to shoulder, were a dozen figures, men, women, maybe even teenagers. It was hard to tell in the dim light. They stood silent and still, facing the house, hands hanging limply at their sides. No shouting, no throwing things. Just silent, oppressive presence like a funeral procession that refused to march forward. For a long time, neither side moved. I tightened my grip on the shotgun until my knuckles turned white. Rocco whimpered low in his throat, ears flattened, against his skull. Finally, after what felt like hours, the figures slowly turned away in unison and drifted off into the night like smoke dissolving into the wind. I sank to the floor, trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. They weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to break me, wear me down, make me question my own sanity. The worst part was, it was working. The days blurred into each other, a grinding loop of paranoia and determination. I barely recognized myself anymore. My reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror showed a hollow-eyed stranger, gaunt from sleeplessness, wired tight with a rage that simmered just beneath the surface. Even Rocco seemed to absorb my tension, prowling the perimeter with his hackles perpetually raised. The world outside the gates moved on as if nothing had changed. Kids played hopscotch on sun-bleached sidewalks. Old men dozed on porches, cigarette smoke curling lazily in the heat. Mothers wheeled strollers past the yard, their gazes pointedly, avoiding my house as if ignoring it would erase it from existence. But beneath that thin veil of normalcy, I could feel it. The rot, the disease. It was in the way conversations hushed when I walked into a store, the way people glanced over their shoulders and quickened their steps, the way no one, not a single soul, offered help or even a kind word. I was the intruder, the infection, the ghost in their machine. One night, near the end of my fraying patience, the real assault began. It started with the power going out. One moment I was sitting in the living room, half dozing with Rocco at my side. The next I was plunged into suffocating darkness, no streetlights, no security cameras, no motion sensors, just blackness so thick it felt like drowning. I grabbed my flashlight and shotgun and moved carefully through the house, every floorboard groan magnified into a cannon blast by the silence. Outside, I could hear them, footsteps, whispers, the scrape of something metal dragging across concrete. I reached the front window and flicked on the flashlight, the beam slicing through the gloom like a sword. For a heartbeat, the light caught a face, pale, grinning, eyes wide and wild, before it vanished back into the shadows. I retreated deeper, into the house, heart hammering. They were testing the perimeter, probing for weaknesses. Somewhere, glass shattered. Rocco barked furiously, launching himself toward the sound. I followed, nearly tripping over the overturned coffee table. The kitchen window hung open, shards of glass glittering like ice on the floor. I aimed the shotgun and fired into the night, the blast deafening in the enclosed space. A scream echoed back, high and thin like a wounded animal. Then silence. Heavy. Expectant. I didn't know how long I stood there, trembling, gun smoking in my hands. Minutes? Hours? Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, the power flickered back to life, buzzing and stuttering like a heart restarting after flatlining. The lights revealed the chaos, broken furniture, overturned chairs, smears of blood leading. Away from the window. They had tried to breach the castle, and they had failed. But for how long? The next day, I fortified again, boarded up the lower windows, added barbed wire along the top of the fence, laid a second layer of tripwires and traps in the yard. It wasn't enough. I knew that. They were escalating, getting bolder. It was only a matter of time before they overwhelmed me entirely, but I wasn't going to make it easy for them. The final night came without warning. I felt it the moment the sun dipped below the horizon, staining the sky a sickly shade of red. The air grew heavy, charged with static. Even Rocco sensed it, pacing anxiously, whining under his breath. As darkness swallowed the world, I took my position at the center of the house, shotgun cradled in my arms, flashlight wedged between my teeth. I had fortified every entrance, wired every weak spot, prepared every trap. I was ready. I thought I was ready. They came all at once, a roar of engines, dozens of them descending on the house like a swarm of locusts. Headlights blinded me through the boarded windows. Tires screeched against asphalt. Doors slammed. Then, the chanting started, a low rhythmic thrum of voices, building into a fever pitch. They battered the gates with sledgehammers, crowbars, bricks. Metal groaned and twisted but held for now. Bottles of gasoline ignited against the fence, sending plumes of greasy smoke billowing into the night sky. Somewhere, Rocco was barking himself hoarse, a savage, desperate sound. I fired blindly through the windows, the shotgun kicking against my shoulder, each blast punctuated by screams and curses. But there were too many of them. For every figure that fell back into the darkness, two more surged forward. They moved like a single organism, coordinated and relentless. The fence buckled. The gate sagged. The house itself seemed to tremble under the onslaught. I retreated up the stairs, barricading the landing behind me. If they wanted me, they would have to come through a gauntlet of traps and bullets to get there. But even as I prepared for the final stand, a horrible realization gnawed at the edges of my mind. This wasn't random violence. This wasn't about the house. This was about me. They weren't trying to scare me away anymore. They were trying to erase me. I gritted my teeth, wiped the sweat from my eyes, and waited for the inevitable breach. For a long moment, everything was silent. No footsteps, no shouting, just the distant crackle of fire and the pounding of my own heart. Then the front door exploded inward with a deafening crash. Shadows spilled into the house like a living flood. I braced myself, raised the shotgun, whispered a silent prayer to no one in particular, and fired. The first one through the door took the full blast of the shotgun, a blur of blood and fabric hurled backward into the mob. They hesitated, snarling and cursing, then surged forward again. I retreated step by step up the stairs, firing, reloading, firing again. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking. My ears rang from the constant explosions. Still they came. Like rats pouring into a sinking ship, driven by some mad purpose beyond reason or survival. They didn't care how many fell. They didn't care about pain or death. They just wanted me gone. I made my final stand at the top of the stairs. The barricade splintered under their weight. Hands reached through the gaps, clawing, grabbing. One caught my jacket, and I slammed the butt of the gun into the grasping fingers, heard bone crunch. Another shoved a makeshift spear through the barricade and grazed my side, a hot flash of pain tearing through me. I didn't have time to think about it. I fired again, until the gun clicked empty. Tossed it aside and drew the heavy metal pipe I had kept for this moment. Rocco was at my side, teeth bared, snarling like a demon. Together we fought, striking out blindly, desperately. I didn't think. I didn't feel. There was only the moment, the endless now, and the certainty that I would not go quietly into the dark. Every swing of the pipe was a heartbeat. Every snarl from Rocco was a war cry. They pushed forward. We pushed back. Bodies piled at the foot of the stairs. Blood slicked the wood, made the footing treacherous. Still they came. But something was changing. I could feel it, a shift in the air. Their momentum was faltering. Their movements growing sluggish, uncertain. They had expected an easy victory. They hadn't counted on resistance. Real, savage resistance. One by one, they hesitated. One by one, they faltered. I roared, a sound torn from the depths of my being, and charged, swinging wildly. The mob broke, stumbled, retreated. Fear. The same fear they had tried to drive into me now infected them. I chased them down the stairs, through the wreckage of my home. Out into the yard where fires burned and the night screamed. They fled into the darkness, scattered like insects before a flame. I stood there, panting, bloodied, battered, triumphant, alone but unbroken. The house was ruined. The yard, a battlefield, but I was still standing. Rocco limped to my side, his flank torn but his spirit unbowed. I knelt beside him, pressing my forehead to his, whispering thanks. He had fought for me when no one else would. He had stayed when everyone else had turned away. Dawn crept over the horizon, pale and trembling. The fires guttered out, the smoke thinned. The town lay silent and still, its mask of civility shattered beyond repair. I stood in the wreckage, a monument to stubborn defiance. I had survived the siege. I had faced the hatred, the fear, the madness, and I had endured. The war was over for now, but I knew deep down that peace would never truly return. Not here. Not. For me, I was marked. Changed. I would carry the scars of this night forever, written deep into the marrow of my bones. But there was pride in that pain. Pride in having stood my ground when it would have been easier to run. I turned my back on the smoldering ruins and walked into the sunrise, Rocco limping faithfully at my side. We didn't look back. There was nothing left for us here anymore. Only the road ahead. Only the unknown. And in that unknown, the fragile, flickering hope that somewhere, somehow, we might find a place to call home. A place where we wouldn't have to fight to exist. A place where we could finally truly be free.